New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
I'm here, and it's today's episode of the Inclusive Church, where we come together and remind ourselves that we've made a commitment as a leader to move into or to create an environment and expand an environment where there are many, many kinds of people in our spiritual communities. I'm the author of Stained Glass Spirit, Building Spiritual Communities Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness, as well as a few other books. And this show gives us the opportunity to just explore what does it really mean to build a stained glass spirit community where there are all kinds of people who are working together, creating a fabulous environment, in fact, creating heaven on earth together, bound together by the teaching of our spiritual belief systems. So if you have been a regular visitor, or watcher or viewer, that's the word I'm looking for. If you have been a regular viewer, you know that when I have a guest, the show typically goes for about an hour. And when I don't have a guest, I try to keep the show to 30 minutes or less so that you can get something that's useful, valuable, interesting, or inspiring, but then move into the rest of your day. I'm always glad to give you that little gift of extra time when I can. And so today is a toolkit Tuesday, a toolkit session, where I'm going to invite you to not so much take a specific tool, but to think about a trend or an issue or concern. And that is this question. As you are inspiring and guiding and leading the people in your church to be inclusive, is that grounded in obligation? Or is it grounded in opportunity? How much of it is grounded in obligation and how much of it is grounded in opportunity? And what difference does that make when you think about your goal of getting people not only engaged in formal programming that you may offer, but engaged in being the example of a person who is inclusive beyond the walls of your church or the limitations of your programming. Now, this is always a very interesting conversation for me. And while I'm going to share some of that with you today, I also want you to be thinking about how you have this conversation with leaders in your church, because it matters. And it matters also depending on what your ultimate goal is. So I'm constantly going back, whether it's in this show or in webinars and workshops I do, I'm constantly going back to how have you linked your prioritization of inclusion to the spiritual beliefs or the spiritual values that your faith tradition teaches. Because for me, that's the real reason why we do it. And I guess even more so for me, that's the only thing that gives you authority to push for inclusion or to model inclusion in your church. And so many of the leaders in churches that have difficulty with getting the congregation or even just other leaders in their church to get on board, most often the reason that there are challenges is because people do not understand, or it's not being explained to them as grounded in the spiritual tradition of your church, of your faith. So there's no surprise that I'm constantly going back to what is it that your faith system teaches that is the foundation for you saying we want to be more inclusive. So having reminded you of that, this question of, do people in your church understand the conversation about inclusion to be an obligation or an opportunity? How much of the commitment that you and others have is driven by what's perceived as it's an obligation? We live in the 21st century and all these things are going wrong, and there's so much division in politics, and we have an obligation to fix that problem. Or we have an obligation to, on the positive perspective, we have an obligation to walk our talk. We talk about every person being an emanation of the one God. And if we believe that every person is an emanation of the one God, then every person is of value. And in our church, we recognize that everyone who comes in and everyone who we invite in is an emanation of the one God and is welcome here. That's an obligation, but it's an obligation based in principle. Or is it an obligation based in, we've got to fix the politics that are happening, or we have to counter the political decisions that are being made, and it's our obligation as good people to fix what's broken? Or how much of your commitment to inclusion in your church is guided by what you perceive as an opportunity? Maybe on the positive side, maybe it's a marketing opportunity. We want to have our congregation serve 500 people a week, and we're at 200 people a week right now. And so to grow our church by 300 people a week in terms of people attending either Sunday service or other things that we host during the week, that we want to be inclusive of people we have not attracted in the past. that could be positive or it could be negative. It just depends on, are you positioning it as an opportunity that helps you achieve your goals? Or we have a goal to make sure at least 1,000 people in our community, 1,000 new people, hear about and learn about the unity approach to life, or the science of mind philosophy, or how divine science approaches dealing with everyday life, or right, it's like that's an opportunity. We set a goal of reaching 1,000 new people, which automatically means I'm going to be quote unquote marketing to, or attending events in, or hosting different kinds of activities to be more inclusive, because the opportunity is to make sure 1,000 new people know about our faith tradition. But also saying we want 1,000 new people could feel like an obligation. Oh, we need to go to the Hispanic community and the deaf community because we want 1,000 more people, and and we're going to use them to get to that goal. That's more of an obligation, or it's an opportunity, but a negative opportunity. I'm doing this to use them to reach my goal versus this is the goal because I want to actually serve and teach. Now, I am very much aware in this question how much of your commitment to inclusion is driven by obligation and how much by opportunity. I am very aware that successful inclusion strategies include some of both. But it's critically important to be able to distinguish how much of our framing for our commitment to inclusion is driven by obligation and how much is driven by opportunity. So, as you go into the week, I'm going to invite you to use that question as a tool if you are willing to have some candid conversations with people who are actively involved in your church to find out how they understand the inclusion strategy that you have been leading. How do they understand it? Because that will be the best reflection of how you have talked about it, what kinds of activities you have hosted or planned in the past, how those were marketed. Because it could be one thing in your mind, and it could be being perceived in the congregation as something completely different. Often what happens is when we are talking about the importance of being inclusive, if we aren't specific enough, then people tend to pick one or maybe two categories of inclusion that they assume you're talking about, right? The most obvious ones are race, race/ethnicity, and sexual orientation. That when people hear the word inclusion, they think, oh, well, or if they hear the word diversity, but it's, even with inclusion, they immediately think, oh, here we go again. They're going to be talking about racism. And inclusion may address the disparities that have resulted from and the stereotypes that have resulted from racism existing, but you may not really be speaking to that. If you're using the word inclusion, you are probably talking about many different ways that we show up as in identity groups. In our churches, the third one that comes up a lot is generational differences. And it's, how do we include more younger people, because the majority of our congregation is in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And if we don't replace them or add some younger people, then we basically are should be planning an exit strategy. But how do people, you can hear that, you can talk about that as an opportunity, you could talk about it as an obligation. So, it's an obligation because we want our church to survive. So we must go and do this. And, or is it an opportunity because, oh my goodness, look what we have the opportunity to do, to seed into the next generation this philosophy, and have people use it during the years that they are raising children, or during the peak of their work career, to help them be even more successful as a parent or as a professional. A lot, not all, but a lot depends on the way that you are positioning it. So this week, if you're courageous enough, pick 5 people or 10 people and have conversations with them about whether they understand the reason you're focused on inclusion. Do they see it more as an obligation, or do they see it more as an opportunity? There's no right answer. But what I hope happens is, as you're having the conversations with people, that they will be reflecting to you exactly what you want in the percentage. Maybe, maybe I want it to feel like 25%. It is an obligation of us living our faith and being an example of our belief system. And 75%, here are all the opportunities, the benefits, what we, it's like, what do we get from it? What do we get from the process? What do we get from the impact of what we're doing? That what are we building versus what are we protecting, or worse, what are we fighting against? Um, and I have a lot to say about that, but I'm going to do my best not to get off track here, because I do have a lot to say about the many, many people I talk with who may deep down be very much grounded in the opportunity to express and expand the spiritual principles that are the foundation for the faith that they are part of, the faith system they are part of. But everything they do and say is all about a reaction to what's happening politically, or it is about fighting and conquering and being better than whatever is causing the discrimination or the discomfort of people who are different from one another being together and worshiping together or studying spiritual principle together. So, what's critical is how you present it. Are you dictating? And, I'm smiling because I hadn't thought about this example in advance, but I'm very just what came to mind was an example, and this was a couple of years ago. And there was a very influential leader in a spiritual movement, and 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 they were saying a lot of they were sharing, and they were actually in trying to inspire people to be much more aggressive in their attempts to be inclusive of people from different identity groups. And there were a small group of people who, they had been kind of like these were the people around that one person who was very vocal, and they were, in agreement. So it was easy for them to be like, yes, that's right. That's the right message. Yes, we need to be doing this. And when the message was then being shared with a larger number of people, there was a lot of pushback. And this person who was the main spokesperson, and most of the people in the small group that had been like cheering them on and saying, yes, we got to do this. For the people who were like either confused or even in disagreement, the message that they were given, that was given, was, well, I know best. I've thought about this a lot. It's time for us to do this. And if you're not with us, then, basically that's too bad, because this is where we're going, and you need to just get on board. And there was some more pushback, not really aggressive pushback, just pushback and some questions. And the response to that additional pushback and the questions was, well, if you don't get it, then you can just go somewhere else. Like, leave us, because we're going. And if you don't get it already, then just go away. And it created a really uncomfortable tension, an unnecessary tension. And it created that enmity that wasn't, right? The purpose and the goal was the exact opposite of that. And it represented the patterns of a hierarchical, patriarchal, supremacist even, or a colonizing manner. It's like all the things that this leader and group were saying they didn't want to be the guide anymore. They were using to prove that they were right and everybody else was wrong. And it was really sad to see happen. But if I'm honest with you, it's not the first time I've seen that. It's just that this was on a much larger scale than I had personally seen before. So, this is why my challenge to you this week is to go have some courageous conversations with 5 to 10 people, asking them and then listening, not asking them if they agree with you, but really asking them from the work that we've done so far that is focused on inclusion. What do you understand is our motivation or our reasoning or our big why? And asking them the way that we've been talking about and we have been committed to, or we have been committing to being more inclusive in our church. Do you see that as more of an obligation or more of an opportunity for us? Or maybe it's not an either or. Maybe you ask them, how much of that do you understand to be our obligation? And how much of that do you understand to be an opportunity for us? And what drives the obligation? And what are we going for in the opportunity? So I really don't have a whole lot more to say about it. I think this is something we don't slow down enough to think about and then also to take action on. And often as leaders in our spiritual communities, we are just so convinced that we should do a certain thing. We don't check in to find out is the message really coming across when everybody else is taking it in from their own personal filters? Now, hopefully, the longer you've been leading an inclusion focused effort in your community, the more consistent you will hear, more consistency you will hear in the responses that people give you. Because hopefully you've been consistent and you've been building and growing the message over time. And still, it would be important that you confirm that through these conversations. If inclusion is a relatively newer topic in your community, then this is the perfect time to actually get some input from people so that you can know whether to tweak and how to tweak your messaging and the examples that you are setting and the verbal examples that you are including when you are teaching a class or speaking at a service or at an event, so that you can ensure that the congregation and the community are understanding the spiritual obligation, not the political obligation, the spiritual obligation and the benefits to themselves individually and to the church as their community. So I think that is about it for today, and this idea of is inclusion an obligation or is it an opportunity, and how does that apply to you? Of course, I want to remind you that we archive these shows, and so you can always find the recordings of past shows by going to the playlist, and obviously you can scan the QR code and get to the playlist. And the other thing that I do on Tuesdays beside the Inclusive Church is I do send out a prayer every Tuesday. It's part of a series called Treatment Tuesday. And every Tuesday you receive in your email, direct to your email inbox, a treatment or an affirmative prayer about different topics. So if that's something that would be helpful for you or inspiring and encouraging for you, then I invite you to scan that QR code and get on the Treatment Tuesday list as well. That's it for this week's episode of The Inclusive Church. Hope you got something that you can use, and I will see you again next Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, right here on the New Thought Media Network.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.